Alright guys, in today's video, we're going to compare the Sony a6700 versus the Fujifilm XT5, y'all. This is the video that y'all been waiting for. I think this is a great comparison to do because I feel it pits two of the best APS-C cameras against each other. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, but which one is better? Well, we're going to find out in this video, and stick around until the end and I will give you my answer to which camera I would pick if I were to choose just one according to my shooting style and needs. Let's go. Now right off the bat, you'll notice that these two cameras have their EVFs placed on different sides. The Sony a6700 is going for the rangefinder style look, so their EVF is along the side of the camera, whereas the XT5 goes for the traditional look and it has their EVF placed in the center. Now speaking of EVF, the EVF on the Sony a6700 isn't that great at all. I am not a fan of it at all. Sony users who came from the previous generations of the Sony a6300 may see this EVF on the a6700 as an improvement, but it's not that bright and it's hard to see when you're framing your shots at times. The Sony a6700 has 2.35 million dots EVF and the Fujifilm XT5 has 3.69 million dots. And it shows on the XT5. The viewing experience on the XT5 is much more pleasant for me. And for the dials, you're looking at two school of thoughts here. On the XT5, you got the old school retro dials that controls the exposure triangle. You got the ISO dial, you got the shutter speed, and the exposure compensation dial. People who want a more tactile feel with their camera experience tends to enjoy these retro dials a lot. The Sony a6700 goes for more modern aesthetics, and it's got the spam dial with 3 custom banks and as well another programmable dial besides the spam dial. And from there you got your toggle switch that goes from photo to video to S and Q mode. And that goes the same for the Fujifilm XT5 as well. And you got the many buttons around the a6700 camera, which are all mappable to do different things according to your needs. The a6700 has a D-pad that can also rotate, which is pretty cool. The XT5 does have a traditional D-pad that doesn't rotate like the Sony a6700, but it does have something that the a6700 doesn't have, and that is a joystick. Now I find this an easier way to just point where I need my focusing point to go on the XT5 instead of the couple of extra steps that I need to do on the Sony a6700. Now both are different workflows, both will take some time getting used to. Both have an LCD back screen. The Sony does have an articulating touch LCD screen and the Fujifilm has a 3-way tilt touch LCD screen. Now if you're a photographer, you will prefer the XT5 and its tilt screen more, and if you're like a vlogger and a video creator, you may prefer the Sony a6700. The Fujifilm XT5 does have dual SD card slots, whereas the Sony a6700 has one. So if you're someone that needs the redundancy and that backup, the XT5 is the better choice. The XT5 and the Sony a6700 both have hot shoe mounts, which I find is necessary. You don't want to spend all this money on a full frame camera only to find out that you can't mount a flash trigger onto the hot shoe mount. Lumix S9, I'm talking to you. But the hot shoe mount is also great if you're a Sony user and you want to record any audio without having any cables stick out of the camera. Sony has this wireless shotgun mic that is great and that is compatible with most of the newer Sony cameras. And the audio sounds great as well. Both have USB-C ports, micro HDMI ports, a headphone, and a mic jack as well. Both cameras also have weather sealing, and in my opinion, both cameras have great battery life. I was able to film 4K 24p content and fill up my 128 gig SD card until the Sony a6700 died, which was around over an hour of footage. The XT5 is the same for video as well. And for photos, whenever I'm out shooting, 2 to 3 hours, I still have almost half the battery left over. So your mileage may vary depending on what you shoot. The Sony a67 has a solid grip. I do like holding it better than the XT5, but both can benefit from some sort of hand grip from, companies like SmallRig to make your experience much more comfortable. Now this is where I find the Sony a6700 to be the most reliable. The Sony a6700 has that Bion's XR chip alongside the new AI processing chip that helps detect subjects and predicts tracking movements. I find this camera to be so good and it's so refreshing to have good autofocus. As a Fuji shooter, all I really wanted is good and reliable autofocus, and the XT5 doesn't have that. There are times where it's not as confident in itself when tracking a human for video, or there are times where it just focuses on the corners of the screen and not at the center where the subject is. This is very frustrating as a Fuji user. Now, I was filming some fitness stuff for some client and I needed to get some B-roll from myself working out in the gym, and I asked the client's wife to help me, film some footage. This is a person who's never held a camera and lens like this before. The most she ever used was her smartphone camera. And with some direction and guidance from me, with the face and eye tracking turned on, I was able to get good shots with her help. So I was so impressed by how good the Sony's AI tracking was, and I trusted it enough to give it to someone who's never used a mirrorless setup before to film me. To be able to have full confidence in an AF system and just hand it to someone who has little to no experience in handling a camera is huge. And this is the benefit of owning a Sony camera with the new autofocusing system. Now, I don't think I would be able to do this with my Fujifilm XT5, unfortunately. I just don't trust the video autofocusing like that on the Fuji. The Sony a67 isn't perfect, but it's a lot better than the XT5. I was able to hit the iris a lot more, whereas the XT5 sometimes would give false positive. Eye tracking would say it's tracking the eye and gives you the confirmation that it is, but it would back focus and either hit the hair, hit the t-shirt area, or hit the ear, but not the face. So it's unpredictable and is not as reliable. This autofocusing system really needs work. For both cameras, single point AF is good. But if you need tracking and subject tracking and touch to track, the Sony obliterates the Fuji by miles. Alrighty guys, we are doing an autofocusing test with the Fujifilm XT5 and the Sony a6700, and then we got the Action screen recorders on, so you can see both the box tracking. So it's gonna be an interesting test to see what these two cameras can do with their autofocusing test. And we got Tom's, who is the volunteer for today. He's gonna be the subject that you guys will be following. So he's just warming up for now, and we should get started right now. Hey everyone, before we begin this autofocusing test between the Sony a6700 versus the XT5 for the photos, take a look at these two photos. Both shots look in focus. These are shot with the XT5 and the Tamron 17-70 f2.8. But when we zoom in to both images, you can see that one image is tack sharp while the other appears not to be as sharp and soft. And this is the problem that I have with the Fujifilm autofocusing system right now. It can never fully acquire focus, even though these two photos are shot one after the other, which is crazy. Just look at the sharp image. This is how I want my images to look all the time. You can see the hair strands on Tom's face, but most of the time, the XT5 images look more like this one, the out of focus shot. But I just want to establish something here. We know what our baseline is for the Fujifilm XT5. When it wants to work, it can acquire sharp focus. However, because people, including myself, have been getting so many almost focused shots, we tend to be a little bit more lenient to these almost in focus shots and then count them as a fully sharp in focus photo. So if we established what a sharp image looks like on the XT5, any other shot that doesn't look like this should not count as an in-focus shot. That's fair to say, am I right? Anyways, just keep that in mind when you're checking out this AF comparison between the two cameras. since everybody's got a different opinion on what is a tack sharp photo for Fujifilm, because every time I say that the Fujifilm autofocusing system sucks, I get other people coming up and saying, nope, it works just fine. So there seems to be like a discrepancy here. So we already established that this image should be the baseline of what a sharp image should look like. And anything that looks out of focus or slightly out of focus, like it's been smeared, should not count as a sharp in focus shot. Even though zooming out, it looks pretty decent. As it stands right now, there are 22 shots that were tack sharp, in my opinion. There are 11 obvious misses, and we have 50 shots that are almost in focus. Again, I'll let you guys be the judge on where to put this. Some people are okay with not having a tack sharp photo, and some people aren't. But let's just say if I didn't include the almost in focus category, then all these almost in focus shots would have gone into the missed focus category, resulting the Fujifilm XT5 to have 22 out of 83 shots in focus. Guess how many misses the Sony got, guys? Just take a guess. I took 77 shots, and out of 77 shots, 3 of those shots were missed focus, leaving 74 shots were in focus that was tack sharp. And I updated to the Reala Ace firmware version, where supposedly they fixed the autofocusing issue, but they didn't, guys. So there's that. So the Fujifilm XT5 has a 40 megapixel sensor, whereas the Sony a6700 has a 26 megapixel sensor. 40 megapixels means you have the ability to crop your images in and still have details left over. Now, I find the picture quality of the Sony images to be much sharper than the XT5, even though the XT5 does have more megapixels. I don't know what it is about Sony cameras, but every time I take an image, it is of the utmost sharpest and crispiest images that I've ever seen. I find the photos on the Sony to be good, but I still gravitate towards the Fuji photos. I do have a bit of a bias though, because I've been shooting with the Fujifilm longer than I have with Sony. I love the way the colors look on the Fujifilm a lot more, and when it comes to editing the RAWs, the post-processing time that I do on the XT5 is a lot faster than on the Sony. Now, this is something that not many people talk about, but I feel that it's very important. I like to say that I'm a decent editor when it comes to like editing photos, and with the Fuji RAW, I don't have to spend that much time on it. I can get the look that I want very quickly and it would look great. However, with the Sony files, I tend to spend more than I would like trying to get the images to look right. Even when I am satisfied with the images, it just never feels right to me. I don't know what it is. The Sony a6700 color science did improve though. It's a lot easier than before, so I'm much happier with the results I've been getting on this camera than any other Sony cameras that I've used. So kudos to Sony for fixing their color science a little bit. Now, when it comes to straight out of camera JPEGs, the Fujifilm does beat Sony in this section by miles. Now, if you're someone that doesn't want to edit and that just wants a good looking image right out of the box, Fujifilm is that camera to get. The film simulations is the driving force behind the good straight out of the camera JPEGs. And you also have a website like Fuji X Weekly where they provide you with recipes to get different looks. You have many options to choose from to get photos to look really, really good. Now let's move on to the video quality. Now I think both 4K videos from both cameras look great, and it comes down to what you prefer. I find that the videos on the Fuji files to have a softer look, whereas the Sony has that sharp crispiness video that you see all friggin' time. The base ISO on the Sony a6700 is at ISO 800, so there is less noise as opposed to Fujifilm's F-Log2 base ISO, which starts at ISO 1000. The Sony a6700 also has a dual native ISO, and the second native ISO kicks in around ISO 2500. So all the ISO leading up to that second native ISO does get a bit noisy, but once it hits ISO 2500, you see the footage cleans up again. So if you are ever filming in low light scenarios a lot, the Sony a6700 is the better choice. And this is something that I wish Fujifilm had in their video specs as well. That would have been great to have. Both cameras can film up to 4K 60p. Fujifilm can film 6.2K up to 30p. The Sony cannot. However, the Sony a6700 can film 4K 120 with a 0.5 times crop. whereas the XT5 doesn't have the 4K 120 option. Both have 10-bit 4:2 log recording for the folks who wants that flexibility to color grade their footages. However, if you're someone who doesn't want to color grade your footage, both cameras have a baked-in cinematic profile that you can use respectively. The Fujifilm has the Eterna film simulation that you can use, and I think it looks great. And the Sony has the S-Cinetone, and I think the footage coming out of that looks great as well. Now, both cameras have IBIS. This is great for photos and videos, but I find that the Sony IBIS is not that good compared to Fujifilm's IBIS. The IBIS on the Sony cameras were really never their strong suit. It was just there. Now, this is me just having experience of filming a little bit of video handheld on both cameras and seeing that the Sony a6700 footage tends to be shakier even with the IBIS on. So you just have to be a bit extra careful on the Sony. So I do enjoy both shooting experience. They both bring a different vibe whenever I'm using each camera. Shooting on a Sony made me realize that it's nice to have a good autofocusing system that is reliable and that you can depend on. Now, this was apparent when I had to let another person film me do some gym lifts at the gym. Now, I know if this was the Fujifilm XT5 and its autofocusing system, I won't be able to do this. And I would actually need someone who knows what they're doing and knows the system and understand the quirks of the Fujifilm X system to come help me film. And I don't have that luxury at all. Listen, I had both cameras with me during this shoot in my backpack. And when I looked down at my bag, I was just disappointed at the Fujifilm XT5 for not having a better autofocusing system. Sony made me realize that all the colors and the film simulations don't mean shit if the images and the footage are not in focus. Something that proves to be a challenge for the Fujifilm system. The Fujifilm XT5, however, does have that fun factor. It does inspire creativity, even though their autofocusing tracking sucks right now. Like, I do have a lot of fun shooting with the Fujifilm system, don't get me wrong. My editing workflow is based around using their film simulations in Lightroom and editing around that. So it just makes editing photos so much easier on the Fuji RAWs. I like the Fujifilm colors a lot more. I like the film simulations a lot. I feel like their photos have soul. And every time I review my images, I get so excited. And that's something I can't say for the Sony, you know what I'm saying? Again, this is all subjective. Both these cameras can take excellent photos and videos. It just boils down to what I think are essentials from both companies. If you're someone that's going to do hybrid photos and videos, and you know that you may use this camera to make money in the future, so you need a reliable autofocusing system, like really reliable, just go with the Sony, because you ain't getting no reliability from a Fuji at all, especially with this current firmware. Now, if you're someone who likes to shoot stills and that doesn't require tracking autofocusing, and that is okay with single point autofocusing, that likes to take their time, that likes an easier workflow on editing, that requires that megapixels because you crop in a lot, then the XT5 is for you. And as for my answer at the beginning of the video, which camera would I choose if I were to choose just one, and if I were to remove any biases that I have with my years of experience shooting with a Fujifilm system, and just look at it in a way that makes logical sense, that makes things easy for me, and looking at this from a hybrid perspective, both videos and photos, I'm going to have to go and pick the Sony a6700. I know, shocking, a Fuji guy picking the Sony a6700, you know? That's crazy. The Sony a6700 color science is good enough where I will be satisfied with the image. And I feel color science is like a photographer's first world problems anyways, because when I handed in images taken with the Sony a6700, my client wasn't going around saying like, hey, oh man, you know, these colors suck, and I wish he shot it with a Fujifilm. You know, they said, thanks for the photos, and you know, these photos turned out great. And even though internally I thought the colors weren't as good as Fuji, they didn't know that, and they were content and they were satisfied with their photos. The autofocusing and my experience with on this a6700 has been wonderful, and the story with me just, you know, handing it off to someone else who doesn't know how to operate this camera and have it pointed at me while the AF system takes care of everything is why I would recommend this camera. It's that reliable. The Sony a6700 is freaking reliable. I'm an NBA fan, and this always stuck with me with what Coach Popovich said. I think it was Coach Pop, but don't quote me on that. I think it's been said by many coaches before. But he said something along the lines of, the best ability is availability. And that always stuck with me, because you got someone like Kawhi Leonard who's making millions of dollars, but he's always injured. And when the playoffs comes around, he's not even playing, and it's costing his team the season. And he's one of the best players that we have in the league too. So if you cannot even play, what use are you to the team? You need someone that you can count on and be reliable in the playoffs to help you win games. And during the playoffs, there are a lot of injuries that happens, and a lot of people are sitting out. So it's usually the healthy teams, the ones with the available players, who do end up winning. So that's how I look at this situation with the Fujifilm XT5 right now. Yeah, you got a great camera, you got a beautiful looking camera that takes, beautiful images, but film simulations and color science don't mean shit if your shots are out of focus half the time you're tracking it. It doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you guys? Cameras are expensive. Everything in the world is getting expensive. So I cannot recommend a camera that is more expensive than the Sony a6700 that misses half their shots in continuous autofocusing tracking. I just can't. The Sony a6700 is around $1,400. The XT5 is around $1,700. So $300 more for less than stellar autofocusing system. Now I just can't do that. Maybe if the XT5 puts up more of a fight in the autofocusing department, I can recommend it more. But as of right now, the Sony a6700 to me looks like the better value, and you're getting everything. Great video specs, photo specs, reliable autofocusing, and it just makes more sense to me for anyone who is starting out, anyone that is looking to do a little bit of everything. However, for the advanced shooters that knows how to deal with, Fujifilm's quirk, the XT5 is still a good camera. So there you have it. What are your thoughts? Which one would you get? The Sony a6700 or the Fujifilm XT5? If you're interested and you want more information on both these cameras, I'll leave the links down in the description below, and consider subscribing for more Fujifilm and Sony content like this. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. Which one would you get? A6700 or the XT5? And thanks so much.